Well, folks, we all know that the Democrats have a very, very uphill battle in the 2026 Senate races, with three incumbent Democrat senators choosing to not run for re-election in 26 and a Senate map with very, very few opportunities for the Democrats to pick up. It is very, very fair to say that the Democrats have no shot at winning back the Senate in the 2026 elections, but we're going to break that down and show you how close can the Democrats get to flipping the seat, and what would they need to do to flip the Senate? Drop down below, hit that subscribe button, make sure you never miss another video from us again in the future. Let's get into it. So obviously right now we know that the Senate is currently controlled by the Republicans with a 53-seat majority. The Democrats have a 45-seat majority plus the two independents, Angus King and Bernie Sanders, that caucus with the Democrats, which makes it a 47-seat minority for the Democrats. John Thune, the leader of the Republicans, Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Democrats, are really getting the engines going for 2026. They know that the midterms are going to be a big fight between the two parties. There's going to be a fight to maintain what President Trump has already been able to do in his first 2 months as president and continue to be a legislative body that is going to approve of what President Trump is doing, versus the Democrats that want to be obstructionists, who, shall I point out, have the lowest approval rating that they've had in almost 35 years. 27% according to a recent NBC poll. Hasn't been that low since 1990. George Herbert Walker Bush was our president in 1990. George Herbert Walker Bush was about to defy the American people when he said, "Read my lips, no new taxes." And then he would vote to raise taxes for Americans. But all of that aside, we're going to be taking a look at the Senate map today, how it stands right now, what Democrats need to do if they want to pick seats up, and what is the most realistic outcome. So, looking at the Senate map, this is what it looks like right now. You have the Democrats are going to control, or I should say, are most likely going to win Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico. You have Illinois with Dick Durbin, Colorado with John Hickenlooper. Now, Virginia, I'm keeping it blue in there, but we're going to talk about this a little more. Mark Warner's up for re-election there. Rhode Island with Jack Reed. New Jersey, I think Cory Booker's up for re-election. Delaware and Massachusetts. These are the Democrat strongholds right here. This is where the Democrats, we know they're going to win these elections, with about 95% certainty. When it comes to the Republicans, we know the same thing is true with all of these states: Alaska, Idaho, Montana, West Virginia, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. I shouldn't go through all of these, but the big ones here: Florida, Ohio, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Ohio. We're going to get into what are the toss-up states. We all know the toss-up states are kind of similar to what the toss-up states were for the presidential race in 2024. A couple that aren't, but Michigan, Georgia, North Carolina, those are all on the map right now. You could even say New Hampshire, which I think is a tilt Democrat state. Tilt, not lean, tilt. But ultimately, that's going to be a toss-up in this upcoming race. So let's get into this. So we're going to start off with the wonderful state of Michigan. As we know, Michigan incumbent senator elected in 2014, Gary Peters, won in 2020 by a very, very slim margin, is not running for re-election in 2026. He's calling it quits, which, to be honest with you, is pretty young. This is usually like the age when most people get into the Senate. He is 66 years old. This is typically when you see people start to run for the Senate. But you have Gary Peters going in the opposite direction saying, hell no, I'm out. I'm retiring. I'm done. We've had enough. And I don't blame him. If I were a Democrat up for re-election in a moderately, even a state that Kamala won by 5 points in 24, I'd be like, hell no, get me the hell out of here. They're going to get dragged through the mud. But we all know Michigan is considered on the federal level a purple state. It is a very nuanced political state. They've had Gretchen Whitmer, a very extremely liberal governor, govern the state since 2018. And attempts by Republicans to beat her have not been successful. You had Gary Peters in this state, who not running for re-election. So who is there that could potentially replace Gary Peters? Mallory McMorrow, who is the state senator from the 8th District since 2018, is expected to announce in April of this year that she will be running. There's some other names that have been thrown out there. Haley Stevens, she's the U.S. representative for Michigan's 11th Congressional District. Dana Nessel, who is the Michigan Attorney General right now. Sarah Anthony, who's a state senator. Some other names that have been thrown out there, including Rashida Tlaib. It's like, please, God, if you want the Republicans to win this seat, please, God, nominate Rashida Tlaib. Please. I start getting on my knees and praying. Please, God, Rashida Tlaib, please run. Because you have zero chance of winning a statewide election in Michigan. Zero chance. And as we know, the candidate with the most national attention, who was initially expected to jump in this race, was Pete Buttigieg. But he announced last week that he will not be running. He's the former U.S. Secretary of Transportation. He ran for president in 2020 and 100% has his eyes set on the 2028 Democratic nomination for the presidency. He just recently, a couple years ago, moved to Michigan, declined to run for governor, declined to run for Senate, and really opened the door for a presidential run in 2028. Another big name that is not jumping in this race, who most likely has aspirations for her own 2028 presidential run, is current Governor Gretchen Whitmer. We know Whitmer is popular in the state of Michigan. Even though this is a nuanced purple state at the federal level, they voted for Gretchen Whitmer. And it really wasn't that close. Let's look at the 2022 Michigan, let's do gubernatorial election. Look at this right here. She beat out Tudor Dixon by over 10 points. When you're looking at a state that is purple federally, but she got her, I'm going to say this, ass whooped by Gretchen Whitmer, an extremely liberal Democrat. Extreme, like left-wing, vax mandates, shut down the entire country. Like, that's who we're talking about here. And somehow she won by 10 points. But she decided she is not going to be running in 2026 for the Senate. She's term limited as the governor. Definitely has her eyes set on the presidential nomination in 2028. Now, on the Republican side, you have people like Mike Rogers. Mike Rogers ran in 2024 for the Senate, lost to Alyssa Slotkin by about 30,000 votes. Or maybe 20,000, 19,000 votes. It was a very, very close election. He's expected to jump in this race as well. Some other names. Tudor Dixon, she was the one who ran against Whitmer in 2022. John James, he was the nominee for Senate in 2018 and 2020. Lost a very tight election, John James, against Gary Peters by about 90,000 votes in 2020. He could be a very formidable candidate in a good year for Republicans. As we know, 2020 was not a good year for Republicans. President Trump lost the election. The Republicans lost the House of Representatives, and they lost the Senate. Not a great look for Republicans in 2020, but in a good election. And as we know, President Trump, 44% of Americans believe that the country is on the right track, according to a new NBC poll. That is the highest since 2004. It hasn't even broke 40% since 2012, but it has not been at 44% since 2004, George W. Bush. January of 2004. If President Trump is able to keep this up and the Democrats been totally flat-footed, it could be really embarrassing for them for what's going to happen. But definitely some formidable names. Some people I don't want to see jump in this race. Ronna McDaniel, get the FUCK out of here. I don't want you anywhere near the Republican Party, to be 100% honest with you. Just being realistic with you right now. And as of right now, the only polling that they had out is between Mike Rogers and Haley Stevens, Mike Rogers and Gretchen Whitmer, and Mike Rogers and Pete Buttigieg. Obviously, Buttigieg and Whitmer are out of the race, but Mike Rogers was winning in one of these polls against Buttigieg and losing in one of them. Whitmer was up by a point, but in this one, Haley Stevens down by 6 points to Mike Rogers. Now, obviously, we know that as we get closer to the election, this could change. 24% undecided. That's a big number right there. I would expect this to be a very, very close race no matter who wins the race. But if I were betting right now, I would say that Michigan is a true toss-up, but if I had to put it one way or another, I would say it is a slight Democrat tilt. Slight Democrat tilt. Only because I want to see how this plays out more right now. I think Mike Rogers can be a very formidable candidate in this race here. I want to see how Haley Stevens, who I think is going to be the nominee as of right now, that's who I think is going to play out. This is not a set in stone. This is just, if I had to, what does my gut tell me? This is what my gut tells me right now. Now, jumping over to the Georgia election, obviously the most vulnerable Democrat up for re-election in 2026 is Jon Ossoff. He's the incumbent senator. He won in 2021, barely beating David Perdue in a runoff election that he had initially lost the popular vote by, but because neither candidate hit 50%, there was a runoff. Ossoff won along with Raphael Warnock in that 2021 runoff. Of course, same election, President Trump lost the House. We lost the House of Representatives. And most likely, we lost the Senate because of the state of Georgia. Now, as we said, Jon Ossoff, the most vulnerable Democrat up for re-election. He's got a lot of baggage that's coming into this race here. You're talking about he voted against protecting women in women's sports. He voted against funding the government, which is going to be very, very difficult for him. Plus, you have a very, very strong candidate on the Republican side in Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp is a very, very popular governor from Georgia. Right now, his approval rating as of mid-February was roughly 64%. 64% of people in Georgia approve of Brian Kemp to, I think it was like 31% or 32% disapprove. Massive, massive approval ratings in a state that President Trump only won in 2024 by about, 2.5 points? Yeah, 2.5 points he won by. Not a huge margin. Brian Kemp can be a very, very good governor. This is what I'm going to say about Georgia. If Brian Kemp jumps in this race, I declare this a lean, Republican state. That's where I'm at right now. This is a lean Republican state. If Brian Kemp doesn't jump in it, it's a toss-up for me. That's where I'm at right now. I have a hard time seeing Brad Raffensperger. I think there's a lot of disdain for Brad Raffensperger after the 2020 election. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene would struggle to win a statewide election like this. Also, you look at people like Buddy Carter or Mike Collins. I think they could be good candidates, but here's the reality. Most polling shows a dead heat in a head-to-head matchup versus Jon Ossoff versus any generic Republican. Brian Kemp is the only Republican that in that polling was up like 6 points. But then, here's an interesting thing, and maybe Republicans want to look at doubling down on this. In that poll, when they polled it, Brian Kemp was up 6 points over Ossoff in a head-to-head matchup. But when the respondents were told that Jon Ossoff voted against protecting women in women's sports, Brian Kemp's lead doubled or tripled. We talk about during the 2024 election, one of President Trump's most effective ads he had was the ad about transgenders. Kamala Harris is for they, them. President Trump is for you. That could be something that the Republicans look to double down on in this upcoming election. We're going to see what happens here. We'll keep you up to date on who jumps in this, but I think Brian Kemp will jump in this race, and I think he will be the next senator from Georgia, which justifies a lean rating right now for the state of Georgia. Now jumping over to Maine, you have incumbent Senator Susan Collins up for re-election, and let's just put it this way, Susan Collins is no stranger to close elections or elections that were predicted to be close. Democrats were projected to win the state in 2020. And you know what she did? She beat him by 8 points, almost 9 points actually. In the same race that President Biden won the state by 9 points, she won it by 9 points as well, an 18-point difference. Susan Collins is one of those moderates in the party who's going to vote with the party 75, 80% of the time. She's not going to be a 99% of the time. She's going to be a 75, 80, 85%. You're kind of in that range there, which is justified because you can either have a Democrat from Maine, most likely who would not vote with the GOP really at all, or you can have Susan Collins who's going to vote with them the majority of the time, but there are going to be some key issues that she does not follow suit on. Obviously, the most formidable challenger that she has right now was also a challenger to her back in 2002, which would be, Maine's, the representative from Maine's 1st Congressional District, Representative Pingree, who was also the nominee for the U.S. Senate in Maine in 2002. Jared Golden has also looked at jumping in this race, something that may tell you that he was the one lone Democrat to vote for the GOP spending bill. Think about that. Is he trying to make a statement for Maine? Maine obviously likes it, where they have many statewide Democrats. And actually, they have Angus King, too, which he's an independent, who caucuses with the Democrats. But then you have Susan Collins. Maybe is he trying to play to that middle ground there? I think so. Also, current Governor Janet Mills, who recently got into a spat-in match about seeing the president in court recently, could potentially jump in this race. We're going to see what happens. But to be honest with you, as of right now, I would put this as a tilt to lean Republican state. I think I'm going to justify it as lean. And this is why. Even in a bad election for Republicans, Susan Collins won the state by 9 points. When it was a good year for Republicans, she won the state by almost 40 points. Almost 40 points she won the state by, which is insane. It is insane. In 2014, 2008, when Barack Obama was elected, she won the state by, over 20 points. And I believe, 2008... Let's see if we can get the 2008 presidential results. Let's see. They obviously voted for Maine, or Maine obviously voted for the Democrats. Let's see if we can get where... Maine, overall, 57% voted for Barack Obama. Barack Hussein Obama, 57% in the same election. That Susan Collins won 61%. 61%. This is insane for a Republican in a Democrat stronghold. 2002, against Representative Pingree at the time, Susan Collins won the race by a little less than 20 points, but still a very large victory. And then, of course, back to her initial victory against incumbent Senator Joseph Brennan in the 1996 elections. Excuse me, not a Democrat. She was incumbent. She was replacing the outgoing Republican senator, which is just absolutely insane. Susan Collins knows how to win in a Democrat state. We should let Susan Collins let her do what she needs to do. And we all know Susan Collins' seat is the top target for Democrats in this upcoming election. We know that. It's no secret, but the Republicans are willing to push $700 million into the state in funding to make sure that she does not lose that state. The Republicans cannot afford to lose this state, and ultimately, I don't think they will lose this state here. And that's why, like I said, I believe Maine is tilt. So already, we haven't even talked about New Hampshire, North Carolina, or Minnesota. Republicans have already maintained the majority they have, and they haven't even flipped Michigan yet, which there's a very big possibility they could flip Michigan. Now we're going to take a look at the state of North Carolina. Now this North Carolina, I do say Maine is a top target for Democrats, but North Carolina may be, and I'm going to explain why, may be the top target for the Democrats in this upcoming race. It could be Maine, it could be North Carolina. I'm probably leaning towards North Carolina on this, and let me explain why. Tom Tillis is a very, very vulnerable Republican. There was some recent polling done in the state that showed that Laura Trump, who's a North Carolina native, was winning in a primary against Tom Tillis by 45 points. He was only getting 12% of the vote. Tom Tillis has been censured by the Republican Party in North Carolina on multiple occasions. And, it's probably warranted. The issue for Tom Tillis is he has supported issues that are not in line with the Republican base. He was censured for trying to negotiate a bipartisan immigration bill that would have given millions and millions and millions of illegal immigrants amnesty under Biden. We all know we did not need legislation to fix immigration. We needed a new frickin' president. But we also know that in a tough race for Republicans in 2020, Tom Tillis was able to sweep it out, win the state by about 100,000 votes, by about a 1.5%, closer to 2% margin in this race, a little below 2%. Back in 2014, when he was initially elected, he won the state barely against a Democrat, won the state by about 50,000 votes. And this was a good year for Republicans. 2014 was a good year for Republicans. But he beat the incumbent Senator Kay Hagan in that race. Now, Tom Tillis, like we said, if he doesn't get primaried by someone like Laura Trump, and obviously there's another Andy Nilsen has jumped in this race here, a teacher's assistant, a no-name. Mark Robinson, the former lieutenant governor of North Carolina, has declined to run, which is great. He cost them the governor's race in 2024. Obviously, I think Thom Tillis will be the nominee unless there's a big push from Trump world to get him out, which as of right now, I don't see it happening. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. I'm just saying from, March 17th today, I just don't see it happen, but it could. But Thom Tillis, if he's able to get through the primary, is going to be in a very, very tight race. Very tight race. Especially if popular former governor Roy Cooper jumps in this race here. The former governor who won re-election twice in the same elections that President Trump won the state by. President Trump won North Carolina twice in the same elections that Roy Cooper won the state twice. Roy Cooper, who's expected to jump in this race here, could make this a very, very difficult race. We've already seen that head-to-head polling from Public Policy Polling and Victory Insights show Roy Cooper up by 1 to 4 points over Thom Tillis, which obviously that could change. Similar with Laura Trump if she were to be the nominee, up 2% with 10% undecided in that race. Now, like we said, and we're just going to pull this polling up real quick just so you can see it. Let's see. Let's look at the North Carolina governor's race. Roy Cooper won the state in 2020 by about 4.5 points. At the same time, when President Trump won the state by, I believe, like a point or two, he won it by. And sorry, I'm using CNN. They're just the first ones that pick up, that come up on here. Trump won the state by about 1.3 points at the same time when Roy Cooper won the state by 4.5. 2016, Roy Cooper barely won the state. We're barely won the state by 12,000 votes. In the same election that President Trump, I believe, and now we got to go to the 2016 presidential election. Let's see, election map. Here we go, CNN. Oh, what the hell is this? In North Carolina, Trump won by 4 points. So still, Roy Cooper has found a way to win as a Democrat in a Republican state, a lean Republican state, during the Trump era. I am not counting Roy Cooper out. Let's just put it that way. 100% not counting him out. It could be very, very tough between Thom Tillis. Now, it doesn't mean that Thom Tillis is just going to roll over and die and let Roy Cooper win. It's going to be a battle to the end, but it's going to depend. Which direction do the Republicans want to go? But also, which direction do the Democrats want to go? Because if Roy Cooper gets in this race, he is going to, just like a lot of moderate Democrats, are going to get that leash put around him by the progressives in the party, and they're going to get dragged to the left. Is he going to be able to defend his moderate positions? Is he going to be able to prevent the left wing of the party from taking over his campaign, from imploding his campaign? That's going to be a big test for Roy Cooper. That could be a serious issue for him in the general election in North Carolina. Now, Minnesota. Let's talk about North Carolina. As of right now, I'm going to say that Roy Cooper's going to jump in the race. I still believe that this is a slight Republican victory. We're talking on the margins here. Maybe a point Thom Tillis wins by. Maybe a point. And that's kind of still saying something. Which, at that point, if that were to come true, the Republicans have officially expanded their majority. Even if they lose in Minnesota and New Hampshire, they have expanded their majority, which, little hint for the future, they could be expanding their majority even further. Let's take a look at Minnesota, where you have the second incumbent Democrat senator who is not running for re-election here, that is Tina Smith. She was appointed to fill Al Franken's seat when he resigned back in 2018. She ran in 2018 in a special election, won against Karen Housley by about 10 points, had to run again in 2020 to get a full 6 years, won by about 5 points against Jason Lewis, who's a former Republican congressman from Minnesota's 2nd District. He was also beat out by Angie Craig in 2018. But the 2026 race could be interesting. It could be very interesting. And this is kind of in order to make a good prediction about Minnesota, you have to let it play out a little further. Because if someone like Peggy Flanagan, Keith Ellison, Melissa Hortman, or Ilhan Omar jump in this race, and the Republicans put up a formidable, good candidate, this could be a toss-up race. This could be a legitimately close race. But if the Democrats put someone like Angie Craig, who is a much, much more moderate candidate relative to these radical lunatics, Angie Craig, if Angie Craig jumps in the race and she's the nominee, I say this is going to be a lean blue state, if not a slight blue state. And it's also going to depend on the overall atmosphere of the political climate in 2026. But if the Republicans decide that they are going to nominate, again, Royce White to be the nominee for Senate in 2024, the Republicans have zero chance if they nominate Royce White. Minnesota, this is what Minnesota looks like. It is a safe blue state. Safe blue state if they nominate someone like Royce White. Anyone would be better. Adam Schwarzy, Julia Coleman, Kristen Robbins, Michelle Tafoya, anyone would be better. Karen Housey, Kendall Quayles, Ryan Wilson, anybody would be better here. I even thought Tim Pawlenty would be good. He is a former Minnesota governor, two-term governor. I thought he would be good. I don't know. Here's the thing. The very extreme progressives in Minnesota are not going to let Angie Craig be at the top of this ticket. They are not going to let her do that. With Tim Walz most likely running for re-election for a third term as governor, Angie Craig is the other moderate in the state who can run. And not that Tim Walz is moderate, just relative to Ilhan Omar and Peggy Flanagan, he looks moderate, even though he's radical. He's far left. But you look at Omar and Hortman and Peggy Flanagan, they're even further left than Walz is. But the thing is, it doesn't matter who the Democrats nominate. It's about the Republicans. If the Republicans nominate Royce White, you're going to see a similar election like 2024, where Amy Klobuchar beat Royce White by 16 points. He got his ass whooped and embarrassed on national television. All while President Trump only lost the state by 4 points. Royce White got his ass handed to him by 16 points in a state President Trump couldn't even carry him out. That's how crazy this dude is. Because here's the thing, you have to look at Minnesota like you look at Maine. You're not going to get a MAGA Republican. You're not going to get an extreme MAGA Republican like that. That is not the type of seat this is. You need a good America First, constitutional Republican, conservative, who's going to vote with the party 85% of the time. He's going to break with them part of the time, but 85% of the time he or she is going to vote with the party. Because the alternative is you get someone who votes with the party 2% of the time. If that. So it really is up to the Republicans on what they do. If the Republicans nominate someone good, a Ryan Wilson, a Kendall Quayles, a Karen Housley, a Michelle Tafoya, Julia Coleman, not Julia Coleman, but Kristen Robbins, Adam Schwarzy could be, but I think the National Republicans need to pour a lot of money into this race if they want to be competitive. But that plus a good Republican, this could easily be a toss-up seat. They nominate Royce White, it's a blue seat. It's just as simple as that. It just is. I don't know what else to tell anybody. That's the reality. So if I were to say today, what do I think is going to happen? I think this is going to be a tilt, if not lean. I hope the Minnesota Republicans decide to not nominate Royce White again. That would be great for Minnesota. But ultimately, I still think this is going to be a tough race for Republicans. Even with good funding from the national senatorial Republicans, it's going to be a tough race. If they cannot get but if everything's right, if the Democrats nominate a radical, if the Republicans at the national level put a lot of money into this race and they get a good conservative constitutional Republican, this could be a race they win 100%, the Republicans. But if Royce White is at the top of the ticket, just say goodbye to it. I wouldn't even spend a dime in the state if I were a national Republican. I promise, I donate money to many different presidential and senatorial campaigns. I will donate $0 to Royce White, just like I did in 24. $0 went to Royce White. So, last but not least, well, we'll have one more after this actually, is New Hampshire, where you have your third Incumbent three-term Democrat Senator Jeanine Shaheen, who has declined to seek re-election for a fourth term. This will be the first open Senate seat in New Hampshire since 2010. And there's no incumbent running in this seat since 1990. Now, there's a lot of people who are expected to jump in this race. That's kind of a joke because there's not. On the Republican side, there's one person in mind. This is 100% a winnable seat. 100% a winnable seat. And the only way that happens, and let's see, is if Chris Sununu is leading this race. If Chris Sununu jumps in here, it's over. It's over. I don't hate to say it, but it's almost over. You know, New Hampshire, obviously they have a couple representatives who are looking to jump in this race here. But here's the deal. New Hampshire in 24 voted for President Trump for Kamala Harris by what? 3 points basically. Let's do the 2022 New Hampshire governor's race. Chris Sununu, at the same time, literally at the same time that, and I guess this is 22, Republicans had a tough year in a Democrat state, won re-election by 15 points. He won re-election by 15 points. Go back to 2018. He won election, holy crap, by almost 30 points here. It is insane. Previous to that, in 2020, what am I saying? I forget, there are 2 terms there. So let's look 2020. 2020, Chris Sununu won by like 30 points in this race here against this no-name Democrat. At the same time, and we're just going to get this pulled up, Joe Biden won the state by 7 points. Is the same time Chris Sununu won the state. He won this state by 30 freaking points. 30 points he won the state by. 2018, a rough year for Republicans. He still won it by 7 points. In a bad year, he wins. 2016, he was initially elected by like 2 points. It's just absolutely insane. Chris Sununu knows how to win in New Hampshire. He knows how to win in New Hampshire. We must trust him. Sununu would be a great Republican, and there's been a lot of people in D.C. who have been reaching out to him. Hey, Sununu, we need you to run. We need you to jump in this race. That's what we need. A Republican, once again, won this state again. But for this Senate race, look, at the same time that Jeanine Shaheen won by 16 points and Biden won by 7, Sununu won by 30. By 30 points. Holy crap. So, if you're wondering who should be leading the Republican ticket in New Hampshire, one person, Chris Sununu. If Chris Sununu jumps in this race, this is a lean Republican state. It's just as simple as that. Sununu is a very, very well-liked Republican from New Hampshire. Now, he's going to be like Susan Collins. He's going to vote with the party 85% of the time, and he's going to break at certain points where Republicans are not going to be happy about it. But ultimately, what is the other choice? The choice is either you have a Democrat who votes with the Republicans 2% of the time, or you have a Republican who's going to vote with the Republicans 85% of the time. The choice is theirs. The choice really is theirs. So if Sununu's in this race, which initially he had declined saying he wasn't going to run in, but after Jeanine Shaheen said she was not running for re-election, he has shown public interest in this. So as of right now, I am declaring this, yes, a lean Republican state. A lean Republican state. And now, just for kind of to play this game, we're going to throw in Virginia. Now, obviously, it is a solid Democrat state. There is no doubt about that. But we're going to kind of break that down real quick. Mark Warner won re-election handsomely by about 13 points back in 2020. But in 2014, which was a rough year for Democrats, he barely was elected. Barely. He didn't even win by a full point. Like, we're talking, 20,000 votes that separate the two here? 18,000 votes that separate the two here? in a good year for Republicans with a strong statewide candidate, this could be won by the Republicans. No one else but Glenn Youngkin at this point could do this. The very popular governor from Virginia who has plus 50% approval rating in the state could 100% win this. But there would have to be a good ground campaign. You want to talk about the campaign there? Let's talk about parental rights. That's how he was elected in 2021 to be the governor of Virginia. Parental rights, to stop the governmental overreach into parental rights. I believe if he were able to rekey his tools there, he could 100% run and make it a competitive race. Now, ultimately, if the national sentiment is against the Republicans, I think it's going to be tough. But if the sentiment is even neutral or even slightly for the Republicans, I think this is something that could definitely be brought into play. Ultimately, let's just say it's a bad year for Democrats. They're at historical lows, 27% approval rating. I can see Virginia being a slight Democrat advantage, and with a good candidate, this could be a toss-up, no doubt. But this is where I'm at right now. This is the best case scenario for the well, I shouldn't say best case. For the Democrats, I'd say this is probably their best case that they have here. Maybe it's like and let's look at it. Best case scenario for the Democrats, they nominate Royce White in Minnesota. Probably a good ground game, well funded. Haley Stevens and Trump really messes up over the next 2 years, and the country is really against Trump. Could cause Michigan. If Brian Kemp decides not to jump in this race, this could be a slight Georgia advantage. If it is a bad year for Republicans, this could be a slight Democrat advantage in North Carolina. I don't think the Democrats are going to win Maine. And if Chris Sununu jumps in the race in New Hampshire, I don't think they're going to win New Hampshire either. So ultimately, I think this is the best, as of right now, that it could get for the Democrats. If we're looking for the Republicans, the best they could get, Minnesota, Royce White does not run. They nominate a good, solid, conservative candidate in the state, well-funded, and the Democrats nominate Ilhan Omar or some crazy radical. A slight Minnesota. Michigan, President Trump has been doing good there. President Trump has a good 2 years. His domestic economic policies start to see real world impacts. Mike Rogers barely sneaks by in this race. You look at Georgia. Brian Kemp jumps in the race against the most vulnerable Democrat in the Senate, John Ossoff. Very, very easy could see this a tilt Republican state. North Carolina, the tide is going good for the Republicans. And Tom Tillis is able to squeak by. And let's say Roy Cooper does not jump in this race. Then I think this could be very, very much be a Republican state by 2 or 3 points. Virginia, bad sentiment for the Democrats. The Democrats have messed up badly. Glenn Youngkin jumps in this race and is able to sneak by a point or two. Obviously, New Hampshire, Sununu jumps in this race, well funded by the national Republicans. Maine, Susan Collins holds on, which I think she most likely will. Well funded. 58 seats. You're almost at a filibuster-proof majority. Almost. And you have some weak Democrats who might vote with the party, with the Republicans. People like John Fetterman, who may cross over the line. So we're going to see what happens here. We've got some good stuff coming up for the 2026 election. But ultimately, I believe that the Democrats, even if everything goes good for them, I just don't. Even like if everything goes perfect for them, they're not taking control of the Senate. They would have to flip somewhere like Alaska or Florida or Ohio. And that's how bad things are for the Democrats if we're talking about flipping a statewide race in Florida or Ohio. That's how you know it's bad for the Democrats. Because where else do they have to go on the offensive? Where else? Maybe you have someone like a Sherrod Brown or a Tim Ryan in Ohio. Maybe. I just don't see it happening. The Democrats have zero chance. Even if everything goes perfect for them, they have a zero chance because they do not have the resources to spend in Florida, Alaska, Ohio, on top of Minnesota, Michigan, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, New Hampshire, Maine. Democrats have zero shot. That's it for today, folks. Drop down below. I appreciate everyone sticking on for almost 40 minutes now. I appreciate every single one of you who has made it this far into this. We will catch you next time, folks. Have a good rest of your night.